Are you a landlord or an aspiring landlord? If so, this video is for you. Because have you ever heard of landlords tell you, I missed my rent, my tenant damaged my property, I can't evict my tenant, my property is destroyed? Or you've heard horror stories about being a landlord and wondered, how could have I avoided this? Well, this video is going to lay out for you exactly how to screen your tenants. Make sure you do all the right things so you get the right tenant into the property so that you can avoid all these horror stories, lost money, damaged property, and overall bad mental health for yourself. In this video, we're going to go over all the processes and give you exact rules to follow so that you can screen your tenants appropriately so you can avoid all these nightmare cases. And later on, we'll dive into more of the exact laws for 2025 that you can use to protect yourself as a landlord or people who want to be an aspiring landlord. And if you like this video, I also have a free checklist that you can find in the description below where you can get access to this. Also, just as a side note, not screening your tenants as well can enable you to lose months and months as rent. And as a personal experience, I didn't screen one of my tenants a long time ago. It cost me 6 months of rent, cost me attorney's fees, cost me thousands of dollars. So I've learned this actually the hard way, and I want to prevent you from suffering that as well. And it's also not just about collecting your rent, it's also about protecting your house as a long-term investment and avoiding costly repairs. So the application process. The application process in screening your tenants is one of the most important steps. Typically in California, for landlords, they're going to charge between $20 and $50 for the rental application fee. If you do choose that specific renter, you usually give that money back, the application fee, to the client. But if you do not, then you keep the money. But there are strict laws about collecting application fees from people who want to rent your property and profiting from them over and over. So please do not collect excessive rental application fees and pocket the money. So here's what's important that you must have on your application. And please be sure to always check photo IDs when you're doing all this, because believe it or not, people lie. So when you're going into this, first, you're going to need their full name, first name, last name. You also want to check their date of birth, social security number. Then you also want to have on your rental application the last 2 years of where they lived, where they resided, because you're going to background check that as well. You're also going to check their employment. It's important for me personally. I like to check minimum 1 year employment, but 2 years of employment stable is way better in protecting yourself. And finally, you want to make sure that they have a bank account, because how else are they going to pay you if they don't carry a bank account and they still need to cash your checks? And finally, you want to have personal references. Make sure they have at least 2 personal references as well, because these are things you're going to want to check on also. And finally, to tie everything all together, you're going to need an authorization to pull credit and an authorization to do a background check. And finally, one of the most things I look at the best, then you're going to ask for 2 pay stubs. You're going to ask for proof of their income. I usually ask for at least 1 year W-2 and 1 year federal tax returns, because I want to make sure they're actually making money to be able to pay me. And finally, one last tip. You have to remember, paper applications and things that people give you can be easily manipulated. So it's important that you also use a digital resource to check all this. For these, there's a couple things that are used a lot. There's apartments.com, there's avail.com, and I actually use Apartment Owners Association to do all my checks through, because it actually follows all the laws and allows me to be better protected. And under no circumstance should you ever do a background check or credit check without any sort of authorization from the client. And also never take any incomplete applications. If you take incomplete applications and you end up going to court, you will lose due to having an incomplete application. So make sure you always get the authorization and you always take complete rental applications to the finest detail. Now let's talk a little bit about the credit check process once you have the authorization once again. So with the credit check process, you're going to be looking at the client's credit scores. Now, a lot of people have different opinions about this. I personally do not rent to people who have bad credit or no credit. Can there be exceptions made? Absolutely. But if you want to play it safe, you want to start minimally looking at people with only a 640 FICO and up. That's going to show you how they paid their debts, Have they not paid credit cards? Are they not paying their car loans? Also, you can also search on your background checks as far as, have they paid their rent? Have they filed lawsuits against other landlords? Do they have eviction notices on their background checks? All these things are going to come into play to see if this is someone you really want to rent to. And finally, on your background checks, some of you may do this, some of you may not. In the state of California, it's a very slippery slope about what they consider you can and cannot do. In certain parts of California, you're not allowed to do criminal background checks. Currently, right now, in San Diego, you can still do criminal background checks, which I would strongly recommend because you do want to know who you're renting to. And also, as a final note, you can also screen those potential renter applicants through the Megan's Law website to also have another idea who you're going to rent your place to. And some specifics as far as screening in 2025 for new rules. There's a new rule for California AB 2493. This rule is a rule that applies when you're collecting that rental fee, like we talked about earlier, for multiple different tenants. All the tenants you did not choose to rent your rental, you must return that fee to. If you keep that money and don't return it, it's a great way to end up in a lawsuit, in a court of law, and you will lose for sure for pocketing that money on rental fees. The other new one in 2025 is AB 2747. This is the law that gives your renters the option to ask you to report their on-time payments to the credit bureaus to help them build credit. Do you have to do this? No, but it is an option you must give your renters to do this, so please don't forget. Remember, the goal is to stay out of court as a landlord. Next, let's talk about verifying income with your potential renter applicant. So the way that I look at this, it's pretty simple. I usually ask for 3 pay stubs, the 3 most current pay stubs, and I require them to give them to me. Then on top of that, I look up their employer online to make sure that employer is still in existence. Then I also call the employer and ask if they're in good standing. Along with that, like I mentioned before, I do ask for last year's W-2s and last year's most current federal tax return, all pages. Then once I have all this together, I look at their income. I go by the 2.5 times rule. Some people go by the 3 times rule. What does that mean? It means when you look at the client's income, you typically want the client's income to have at least 2.5 times more than what you're charging in rent. That way you know that they can still have money to eat, pay their bills, and still have money left over to always pay you rent on time. Now, in the state of California and other states, a lot of people are self-employed. For the self-employed, I do things a little bit differently. If it's an S Corp, a C Corp, anything like that, I actually research that out online as well to make sure that they're still in good standing. If they're basically self-employed and a Schedule C type self-employment, I ask for 2 years of the most recent tax returns, and then I average their income over that 2-year period to see if they have enough money coming in. Then on top of that, I may also ask for the last 3 months of bank statements to see what sort of money is coming in and if it's the same as I looked at from the last prior 2 years tax returns. Because self-employment is very tricky and you don't want to be caught not researching this, and you also don't want to be discriminatory about not renting to a self-employed borrower. So as long as you check these, you will fit all the terms and know that they have the money to pay or they don't have the money to pay. Now let's go into landlord history and checking up on this. So like mentioned before, you always want to talk to their previous landlord, if not their 2 previous landlords. I typically like to go over a 2-year period when I'm checking landlords and whether they paid on time. So something to note, when they give you the landlord's name and the previous place they lived at, beware, people lie. You may not have the real landlord. So make sure you cross-check that landlord's name with the owner of the property and make sure they're the same. If they are not the same, then they could be a property manager. If they are a property manager, you have to check to see if that property manager is operating. Google them, look them up. Now, once you secure that the person you're talking to check the background on paying on time, this is what I look at. Did they pay their rent on time? How often did they call for repairs? Did they pay rent late? Did they have to pay rent in 2 payments? Did I have any problems with collecting rent from them? How were they overall with treating the property? Because that comes into play when you randomly come by once a month to check on your property. Will they grant you access to the property to go in there as long as you gave them a 48-hour notice? They should. But these are things you want to ask the previous landlord to see if they did any of this, because you're going to follow all this stuff on your property with screening them and going inside the property to check. This is to get one final gut check. You've gone through all these background checks, credit checks, income checks. Now it's time for the gut check. And these are the most important. So schedule an interview to meet the potential tenant one more time. And then note these things. Did they show up on time for your interview? How were they dressed for their interview? Were they dressed professional or were they dressed sloppy? When they showed up, this sounds petty, when they showed up on their car, was everything a complete disaster in the car, or was it well taken care of? People that take very good care of their cars usually take very good care of your property. Lastly, ask them a couple questions. How long do you plan on living here? Do you have any immediate goals in the future to be moving? Also ask them, how do you think I can work best with you as your landlord? And then just ask them a couple personal questions that may come across a certain way or not a certain way, and feel your gut instinct out as, I feel good about this person, or a gut instinct tells me I don't feel good about them. My experience is this: never rent to anybody, no matter what comes back. If your gut instinct tells you they're a bad person, do not rent to them. It will cost you thousands of dollars later. So now you have your tenant. Here's what you want to do to protect your property. So first of all, it's your property. Make sure that it is cleaned up to par. Make sure everything is in good working order. Make sure everything is repaired on the walls. Make sure all the appliances work. Make sure the heat works. If the air conditioning works, if you have it. Make sure the oven works, the stove works. Everything has to be in perfect working order. And then when you meet the tenant at your house, you need to take photos of the entire house, because this works with the law AB 2801. You take photos before and after your tenant. Also, I've learned this from being in law. You also should take a video of the entire house with the tenant doing the walkthrough live. That video will probably be 5 minutes long. You can walk with your tenant through the house, video everything in good working order, and your tenant agreeing with you that everything is in good working order and everything is safe and sound. That is one of the biggest things you can do to protect yourself in a court of law if you ever end up in law. Yes, something else we didn't touch on: discrimination. As a landlord, you have to be very, 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 very careful on discriminating. You cannot discriminate on race, religion, sexuality, marriage, kids. And the kids aspect is one of the biggest things I see in lawsuits, is where landlords make the foolish thing of saying, no kids allowed. That is a discrimination lawsuit immediately happening. So make sure you don't discriminate against any of your potential tenants. Make sure you cover yourself on all conversations, and make sure, once again, do not post anything on the internet about specifically saying no kids. That, once again, is a guaranteed lawsuit. Never discriminate. Make sure you cover everything. And one just additional wrinkle, because now we're going into the AI times. Do not input your data into AI and let your AI screen the tenant. AI can make mistakes and actually end up discriminating against your tenant based on the AI programming. So please don't use AI to screen tenants. Do the work yourself. Avoid lawsuits. Like we mentioned before, there's a lot of tools you can use online to help you screen tenants. Here's a couple of the ones that you can use to help you screen tenants and protect yourself. Apartments.com, TransUnion Smart Move. You can also use TurboTenant, and you can use RentSpree, or my favorite, Apartment Owners Association. They do a great job because they work with lawyers, and for a membership fee, you get access to all kinds of stuff that will make your life easier. And I get nothing from them. That's not an endorsement. That's simply that I am a user and I am biased, and they do work great. I hope you enjoyed this video. Just for a quick recap, let's take a look. Make sure you're always doing your rental screening. It's beyond important. Make sure you're doing background checks. Make sure you're doing criminal background checks. Make sure you're checking their income, their assets. Make sure you're checking their rental history. Make sure you're verifying their employment. Make sure you don't discriminate against anybody. And most importantly, make sure you always go slow, protect yourself, cross all your T's, dot all your I's, go through all these processes slow and methodical so that you don't make a mistake. That way, you don't end up in court, you don't lose thousands of dollars in lost rent, you don't have your property destroyed, you get a good rate of return on your investment, and you make cash flow, you build wealth to where the next rental property you buy and you do this again, it's even easier. If you like this video, if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe below. If you'd like anything else me to talk about or go over, please comment below as well. I'm happy to sign up and do a video on that. And lastly, if you would like weekly rate updates about where the market is, you can sign up below as well for my weekly rate update. Thanks again for watching.